The receipt slipped out of my wallet like a forgotten truth demanding to be seen. The Golden Kettle, 6 months ago, cash, and on the back, handwriting I didn't recognize. Return when you're finally ready to begin again. I'd never been there, but somehow the words felt like they'd been waiting for me. That's how the universe works when it's done watching you disappear. It sends you a sign, disguised as something ordinary, and waits to see if you'll follow it. I did. My stomach tightened. I had never stepped foot in any place called the Golden Kettle, but the message hit with the weight of a secret I'd spent years avoiding. The universe isn't subtle when it's done waiting. So there I was, keys in hand, driving toward a cafe I'd never heard of, pretending it was only curiosity and not the wild hope that maybe my life wasn't supposed to feel so small. When I pushed through the door, the air smelled like warm bread and second chances. A woman behind the counter, silver hair, gentle eyes, looked up and smiled, like she recognized me from an old dream. "I was starting to wonder when you'd find your way here," she said. That receipt wasn't trash. It was the first nudge in a story I didn't know I'd already begun. My wallet exploded across the kitchen table like a tiny graveyard of forgotten promises. Expired cards, faded punch coupons, scraps of a life lived on autopilot. I was about to sweep the whole mess into the trash when I saw it. A receipt. The Golden Kettle. Cash $4.50. 6 months ago. Except I had never been there. And on the back, handwriting that curled like it knew my secrets. Return when you're finally ready to begin again. My pulse thrummed. Coincidence tried to speak. Destiny spoke louder. The truth was uglier than burnout. I wasn't just tired, I was disappearing. Every day, a little more. I stared at the receipt, and something inside me cracked. A soft breaking sound only I could hear. I grabbed my keys. Before fear could pin me back into the familiar, I was driving toward a cafe I'd never heard of. My hands shook like they already knew this road could change everything. The Golden Kettle sat nestled between a dusty bookstore and a florist that smelled like sun-warmed petals and new beginnings. The moment I pushed open the door, the air smelled like warm bread and second chances. A woman behind the counter, silver braid, wisdom in her eyes, smiled as though she recognized me from an old memory. "There you are," she said. Not surprised, not confused, expected. And just like that, my story shifted from survival into possibility. Inside, the world softened, worn wooden floors, soft jazz like a heartbeat, learning to hope again. Coffee and bread wrapping their warmth around the room. A few people typed quietly, lost in their own turning points. Behind the counter stood a woman in her late 60s, silver braid, glasses perched low, a calmness that felt ancient. She looked up, and her face lit like she had been watching the door for me. I stepped closer, holding out the receipt like it might explain everything. "I found this in my wallet. Your cafe, your handwriting." She smiled, small and knowing. "I wrote that for you," she said. "You found it when you were ready." And suddenly, the room felt like the world was rearranging itself around a single truth. I hadn't come here by accident. I chose a table by the window, trying to slow my breathing, pretending I wasn't seconds away from spiraling. None of this added up. Not the cafe, not the message. Not Evelyn's uncanny certainty that I belonged here. A moment later, she returned with a cup of black coffee and a warm lemon muffin I definitely hadn't ordered. "You look like you could use something sweet," she said, like she had read the ache behind my eyes. I wanted answers, but all I managed was, "I'm confused." To my surprise, she sat down across from me, folding her hands like we were old friends finally getting to the truth. "People only come through this door when they've forgotten who they were meant to be," she said. My message was only a reminder. You were the one who chose to follow it. My instinct tried to armor up with logic. "It just made me curious," I muttered. Her knowing smile didn't budge. Curiosity is what courage calls itself in the beginning. The coffee was divine, dark, smooth, nothing like the burnt bitterness I bought on work breaks. Each sip melted another layer of numbness. I whispered, "I don't even know what starting over would look like." Evelyn didn't flinch. Most people don't. That's why they come here. This place helps you remember. Her words landed like a challenge disguised as comfort. Then she added, "Come back again. Not for answers, just for space to hear the ones you already have." I should have finished the coffee and left this strange miracle behind. That would have been the practical move, but practicality had been slowly suffocating me for years. So I stayed, nearly 2 hours, watching strangers drift in and out, every one of them greeted like they mattered. Behind the counter, next to the espresso machine, sat a framed photograph of Evelyn with a man whose smile looked like sunshine she once lived inside. It felt important, but the glass covering it was cracked, like someone had dropped it and chosen not to replace it. Loss leaves clues in quiet places. Evelyn didn't just remember their orders, she remembered their stories, their wounds, their wins. When I finally headed for the door, she called out, "See you soon, Mara." I froze. I had never told her my name. She just smiled. "Next time," she said. I returned 3 days later. I told myself it was the coffee, but my heart knew better. The world keeps pulling us back to the places that wake us up. Evelyn lit up when she saw me. "Your usual is waiting," she said. I laughed. "I've only been here once." "Once is enough to know what someone loves," she replied. Same window table, same soft jazz score to my unraveling. "Tell me about your work," she said. I wanted to lie. I wanted to be simple. Instead, the truth spilled out like it had been waiting for this exact chair, this exact woman. "I call myself a journalist," I said. "But I write digital trash, clickbait, gossip, trends that evaporate before the page loads." Her eyes softened, but she didn't comfort me. She confronted me. "Do you still want to tell stories that matter?" The answer leapt out before my fear could rewrite it. "Yes." "What stops you?" "Fear, money, failure. The possibility that my dreams had been delusions." She nodded like she'd heard all this before. "Not easy," she said, "but simple. Start. Not quit my job, not upend my life. Just start. One story worth writing." The idea felt terrifying, which is how I knew she was right. That day marked the first time in years I felt a pulse beneath my routine, and I wasn't ready to lose it again. The Golden Kettle slipped into my routine like it had always belonged there. Every afternoon I found myself drifting toward that little storefront, craving something I hadn't tasted in years. Anticipation. Soon I began to recognize the other souls who gathered there. There was Sam, who once wielded a corporate law career like a shield before trading it for chalk dust and teenagers who needed someone to believe in them. Elena, an artist who abandoned her paintbrush a decade ago after one cruel critique convinced her she wasn't enough. She was learning to hold it again without shaking. And Jonas, quietly rebuilding his identity now that the word husband no longer applied to him. We were strangers facing different storms, but we all sat inside the same quiet turning point. Sam once leaned over and whispered, "Evelyn helped me figure out what I wanted before I even admitted it to myself." Elena described her as the kind of person who knows your story before you can speak it. Jonas simply called her his second chance. I realized the Golden Kettle wasn't just a cafe. It was a place where people learned how to breathe again. People standing at the edge of a beginning. People remembering who they were meant to be. Evelyn remained the calm center that we all orbited. She poured coffee the way some people say prayers. Slow, intentional, healing. She knew when to speak and when to let silence do the work. Eventually, I brought my laptop, not for the job that emptied me, but for the kind of writing that once set my blood on fire. I began small. A local housing activist named Rosa, who'd spent 20 years fighting for families who couldn't fight for themselves. The words were stiff at first, my voice half asleep from years of silence. But something woke up as I typed. First curiosity, then momentum. The spark didn't roar back all at once. It flickered. It warmed. It kept going. And suddenly I was thinking about the story everywhere I went. A quiet beginning is still a beginning. Evelyn would drift to my table, glance at my screen, and offer one perfectly placed sentence that cut through all the noise. "There, that's your voice. Don't lose it again." 6 weeks after stepping through that door, I finished the piece. 4,000 words, interviews, research, depth, proof that the woman I'd buried wasn't gone, just buried. But the high didn't last long. The next afternoon, I opened the Rosa piece again, and suddenly, every sentence looked wrong. Too long, too emotional, too idealistic. Who did I think I was? A real journalist? That dream had expired years ago. A familiar voice crept back in, the one that always knew where my weak spots lived. "You're not good enough anymore. You're embarrassing yourself. You're going to fail publicly." My chest tightened. My hands shook over the keyboard. The fear was so loud, it drowned out nearly everything I'd rebuilt. I hovered over the delete key. Just one tap, and all this silly hope could disappear. Maybe I should stay in my lane. Maybe this new version of me was just a delusion. That's when a cappuccino slid onto the table. Evelyn stood beside me. No lecture, no pep talk, just presence. She glanced at the screen, pages of work that already meant the world to me, and whispered, "Doubt shows up the moment your life is about to expand." I swallowed hard. Tears burned. Because a part of me already knew the truth. If I walked away now, I would never forgive myself. I closed my laptop. Not in defeat, in protection. This story mattered. So did I. And tomorrow I would try again. Real change always tests your willingness to keep going. That night, I curled up on the couch beside David, the man who'd held space for me, and I showed him the draft. My hands shook. When he finished reading, tears balanced on his eyes. "This is beautiful, Mara," he said. "This is you." His praise terrified me, almost as much as rejection. What if the world still didn't want what I had to say? But Evelyn's voice echoed back, "Start, see what happens." So I pitched it. Real journalism, real impact, no clickbait. They accepted $500 and a space where truth mattered. When the story went live, people shared it like a lifeline. They commented that it changed the way they thought. They donated to Rosa's cause. They asked to read more. I sat in the Golden Kettle, scrolling through those comments while sunlight spilled across the table, and pride, real, warm, earned pride, rose in my chest like it had been waiting for permission. Evelyn placed a fresh cup of coffee in front of me. You did the hard thing, she said. You began again. Maybe one story wasn't a new life, yet it was one step away from the life I planned to leave behind. Change doesn't arrive all at once. It comes in sips, pages, and tiny decisions that quietly rewrite everything. For the first time in years, I believed I could rewrite mine. I finally asked the question that had been pressing against my ribs for weeks. How did that receipt end up in my wallet, Evelyn? She smiled like she'd been waiting for me to arrive at this moment, too. Are you sure you want the truth? I am. She folded her hands and spoke with the gentleness of someone delivering a miracle disguised as an answer. It was David. My breath caught. He wandered in here about 7 months ago. He told me about a brilliant woman he loved who'd forgotten her own fire. He hated watching you settle for a life that didn't deserve you. The world softened and sharpened all at once. I wrote down that message, Evelyn continued, and gave it to him. He promised he'd place it where you'd eventually find it. Not when he wanted you to, but when you were ready. 6 months, 6 months of him carrying hope on my behalf. Why didn't he just tell me? My voice cracked. Because you would have said no. Evelyn shrugged, a knowing glimmer in her eyes. You needed the choice to feel like yours. He loved you enough to wait for you to love yourself again. The truth stung sweetly. It hurt because it was accurate. It healed because it was love. I stood, heart pounding, vision blurring, knowing exactly where I had to go next. Some truths demand immediate action. I drove straight to David's apartment. He opened the door with surprise flickering across his face. Mara, what's wrong? Evelyn told me, I said, about the Golden Kettle. The message. You slipping that receipt into my wallet and trusting I'd find my way back. His eyes wavered, unsure if he should brace or hope. I was terrified you'd be angry, he whispered. I didn't want to control you. I just couldn't watch you disappear. Angry? Number. All I felt was awe. You saved me without trying to save me, I said, stepping closer. You tossed me a lifeline without telling me I was drowning. Tears spilled from both of us. I've watched you come alive again, he said, piece by piece, word by word. It's been beautiful. I melted into his arms, swallowing the lump in my throat. Thank you for believing I could find my way back, I whispered, even when I couldn't see anything worth returning to. He held me tighter. I always knew you could. You just had to remember. That night, something inside me finally stopped waiting for permission. I opened my laptop and began shaping the idea that had been quietly blooming in the corners of my mind. A series of stories about people who dared to begin again. Not sugar-coated reinventions, raw human comebacks, careers left behind, love survived, souls pieced back together. I named it Second Chances because that's exactly what we were all chasing. My first piece would be about Evelyn and the Golden Kettle, how she built a sanctuary after losing her husband a decade earlier, how she turned her grief into a lighthouse for anyone who'd forgotten their way, how she helped me remember who I was supposed to be before I drowned in what I'd settled for. The rebirth of one heart always lights the way for another. Every spare moment became reporting, recording, rewriting, believing. David held me through the fear like it was sacred. He even offered to cover rent while I figured out how to live on purpose again. Then came the terrifying liberation. I quit the job that had starved me of myself. My hands shook, but my soul finally breathed. I pitched Second Chances to an editor who reached out after reading my first comeback story. She didn't just like the concept, she loved it. The series launched in October. Each piece took weeks of digging, listening, uncovering the truth beneath the surface. The kind of work that once made me believe journalism could change the world. Readers felt it. They shared it. They wrote to say they were finally ready to try again. Other publications reached out. Not flashy money yet, but enough to live, enough to trust that I wasn't falling, I was rising. 6 months after the receipt resurfaced, I walked into the Golden Kettle on a quiet Saturday morning. Evelyn was there, steady as ever, wiping down the counter like ritual. "The usual?" she asked, warmth curling through her voice. "Yes," I smiled. "And I brought you something." I handed her a printed copy of her story that helped bring mine back to life. She read it standing there, tears slipping down her cheeks before she even realized she was crying. "Mara, this is beautiful," she whispered. "You captured it. All of it." I swallowed the lump in my throat. I wanted people to understand what this place does, what you do. Evelyn shook her head softly. "You helped yourself. I only poured the coffee." "No," I said. "You poured hope. And you believed in me when I had forgotten how." She smiled, the kind of smile that steadies the ground beneath you. "That man of yours loves you very much, you know." A warmth spread through me that felt like belonging. "I know," I said. "I know I'm lucky." She poured 2 cups, joined me at my window table, and for the first time, I wasn't the lost woman she met months ago. I was someone becoming herself again. "What's next for you?" Evelyn asked, her voice gentle but full of expectation. "More stories," I said. "More truth. Journalism that matters. Maybe one day a book, a full version of Second Chances." I didn't know every step ahead, but for the first time in years, uncertainty felt exciting instead of terrifying. I was doing work that made me feel alive again. That is all any of us really want, to choose the life that chooses us back. "I wouldn't have found any of this without you," I whispered. Evelyn shook her head, smiling knowingly. "You would have found yourself eventually. You just needed a little push and a good cup of coffee." We sat in the soft hum of the café, letting silence speak its truth. Morning light painted the walls golden, and familiar faces began to fill the room. People who, like me, had once walked in lost and walked out a little more whole. David appeared a moment later, his smile a soft burst of sunlight. He joined us at the table, took my hand, and squeezed. "How's the writing going?" he asked. "Good," I said, feeling that word bloom inside me. "Really good. There's this story about a former corporate lawyer who found his purpose teaching kids. It's going to change someone's life." "I'm proud of you," he said, love shimmering behind his eyes. I looked at him, at Evelyn, at this place that had become a waypoint between who I was and who I was becoming. "You slipped that receipt into my wallet a year ago. You believed I'd find it when I was ready." "Were you ready?" David asked. I thought about the woman I'd been then, burnt out, small, afraid of wanting anything better. "No," I said. "I wasn't ready at all." I smiled. "But I came anyway." And that changed everything. Evelyn raised her mug. "To starting over," she said, "even when we don't feel ready." We clinked our cups together, warm coffee, warm hearts, a warm world opening again. I scanned the room, the notebooks, the whispered ideas, the quiet courage rising in every corner. This cafe wasn't just a place, it was a reminder. 6 months ago, I followed a receipt into the unknown. I came looking for nothing and found absolutely everything. My voice, my purpose, my beginning. The receipt still lives in my wallet, not as a mystery anymore, but as a promise. Sometimes the people who love us see what we need long before we do. Sometimes we must lose ourselves to find our way home. Sometimes a cup of coffee and a stranger's kindness can reroute the entire trajectory of a life. Every ending is only the start of the next chapter, and today feels like page 1. The sunlight spilled through the golden kettle's window, soft and forgiving, the kind that doesn't demand you to move, only to notice you're still here. I used to think starting over meant erasing everything that came before, but now I know it's quieter than that. It's choosing to keep going, one word, one sip, one breath at a time, until the life you lost starts finding you again. The receipt still lives in my wallet, not as a mystery, but as proof that healing begins the moment you say yes to your own return. If you've ever followed a small sign back to yourself, you'll want to hear the next story.